The city shimmered under the early evening lights, the streets alive with the usual rush of hurried feet and honking cars. Yet for me none of that mattered. My eyes were fixed ahead, on the grand restaurant perched elegantly at the corner of the boulevard. The glass doors reflected my image tall, composed, unassuming. But behind my calm exterior, a storm of memories raged. It was the day my daughter was to marry him, the man who had never bothered to hide his disdain for me. Even now, the thought made my blood boil. I stepped out of the sleek black car and adjusted my coat, a quiet shield against the biting December wind. The valet barely looked at me, though something in the way his hand trembled hinted he knew. Inside, laughter and music floated through the tall doors, the clinking of glasses and low murmurs of guests creating an illusion of perfect celebration. I walked in with careful poise. The instant my eyes met his, I knew. He had arrived early, standing near the center of the main hall, talking to a cluster of friends. When he saw me, his expression didn't flicker with recognition, only irritation. He rolled his eyes, a small, contemptuous gesture that spoke louder than words. I paused for a heartbeat, letting the moment linger. I could almost taste his arrogance, thick and unrelenting, as if he owned the world and everyone in it. My daughter, blissfully unaware, smiled at him across the room. My heart clenched, half with sorrow, half with righteous fury. The guests mingled, dressed in their finery, exchanging pleasantries and raising glasses, oblivious to the storm that had just entered their midst. I could see the waiters adjusting their posture, their eyes flicking toward me with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Something about my presence disrupted the rhythm of their rehearsed motions. I walked slowly toward the reception area, each step deliberate, controlled. My daughter's fiancé glanced away, muttering something under his breath, dismissive and sharp. I caught the corner of his smirk and let it fuel the cold fire burning inside me. As I reached a table near the center, I noticed a subtle pause in the room. A few guests turned their heads, puzzled, their conversations faltering. Something in the air had shifted. I smiled faintly, a shadow of my true self, letting the uncertainty settle around me like a curtain. My mind wandered, tracing the years I had endured, the slighted respect, the whispered rumors, the casual dismissals, all culminating in this one moment. And yet I waited, savoring the anticipation, for they did not yet know. None of them knew who I truly was, what I had been, or what I was capable of. The music continued, a cheerful waltz, but to me, it sounded hollow, distant. I caught the fleeting glance of a waiter, one of the younger staff, whose eyes widened with recognition before quickly darting away. A smile crept over my lips. The first ripple of change had begun. I settled into my seat, letting my presence speak without words. I watched the interactions around me, the carefully orchestrated joy of the wedding, masking the undercurrents of human weakness, pride, arrogance, fear. I was patient. I always had been. Revenge, I had learned, was not a fire to be lit hastily. It was a slow, consuming blaze, and tonight the spark had been ignited. Across the hall his father arrived, moving with that same measured authority he always carried, unaware that the night would soon become one he would never forget. The time had come. Every eye in that room would soon see not the me they thought they knew, but the truth I carried, forged in years of pain and tempered in silence. And as the laughter continued and the glasses tinkled, I leaned back slightly, letting the world spin around me. They had no idea, not yet, but they would. The hum of conversation swirled around me like distant thunder, but I heard only the subtle creaks and sighs of a world about to fracture. I remained seated, my posture effortless, my hands resting lightly on the polished surface of the table. Yet inside, I was every bit the storm I had been outside, controlled, patient, simmering with a calculated intensity. He, my daughter's fiancé, was still nearby, surrounded by his friends. He laughed too loudly at some inconsequential joke, his chest puffed with arrogance, his gaze occasionally flicking toward me. Each glance was a challenge, a silent provocation. I met his eyes once, deliberately, and let my expression betray nothing. Only a faint smirk curved my lips, enough to make him pause for a fraction of a second. That hesitation, the tiniest crack in his confidence, was all I needed. The father arrived shortly after, moving with that self-assured air that had once commanded rooms, boardrooms, even hearts. He scanned the crowd, acknowledging distant acquaintances with polite nods, and then our eyes met. He froze, the laughter in the room faltered, the soft clinking of glasses stilled. A subtle tension, almost imperceptible at first, began to crawl across the room like ice through veins. I could see the recognition forming in his eyes, the rapid computation of memory and disbelief. Is that really him? He whispered, voice tight with disbelief. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to arrest the attention of those closest, enough to make the waiters pause mid-step, carrying trays that seemed suddenly weightless. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, pregnant with electricity. I let the silence stretch, long and deliberate, savoring the taste of control. The father's gaze wavered, flicking toward his son, who now looked confused, a shadow of unease flickering across his perfectly composed face. His friends noticed it too, the tension, and their laughter died in their throats. I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible sigh, as if I had finally arrived at some private satisfaction. The truth I carried, my identity, the weight of my past, was no longer a secret. The air itself seemed to recognize the shift. I rose slowly, each movement deliberate, each step measured. The floor beneath me felt solid, as if it were carrying not just my weight, but the gravity of decades of injustice. Guests turned to follow my motion, confusion etched into their faces. Some whispered to each other, but no one dared interrupt. His father's eyes were wide now, pupils dilated with a mixture of fear and disbelief. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. The veneer of authority he had cultivated over the years cracked in an instant. The fiancé, who had been so smug, so untouchable, began to shrink in the crowd of glances. His friends shifted nervously, unsure what they were witnessing, their voices dying in throats tight with uncertainty. I approached slowly, not hurriedly, allowing the tension to stretch taut between us. Every eye in the room was now on me. The waiter who had recognized me earlier disappeared behind a pillar, probably sensing the inevitable confrontation. The world had slowed, and in that stillness I felt an unfamiliar sense of satisfaction. The first ripple of fear had reached its mark. And then, with the calmest voice I could summon, I let a single sentence escape my lips. I've waited a long time for this moment. The room shifted again, like tectonic plates, grinding under years of pressure. The father's jaw tightened, the fiancé's posture faltered, and the guests, once oblivious now, sensed that something monumental was unfolding. I did not need to say more. The story, the betrayal, the power, all of it hung between us, unspoken yet undeniable. Tonight was no longer just a wedding. Tonight it was a reckoning. I took my seat once more, letting them stew in the uncertainty, allowing the first seeds of panic and awe to take root. This was only the beginning. The ice had broken, and what would follow would be unstoppable. The room had grown heavy with silence, the kind that presses against your chest and makes every breath feel measured. Every eye was fixed on me now, every whisper stilled by the weight of the moment. The father's frozen stare and the fiancé's faltering confidence were a testament to the storm I had quietly brought in with my arrival. I stood slowly, deliberately, letting the chandeliers above catch the glint in my eyes. The subtle click of my heels on the polished floor sounded unnervingly loud in the stillness. Guests shifted uneasily in their seats, some clutching champagne glasses, some whispering frantic questions to each other, trying to fill the void of silence with meaningless chatter. But it was useless. The room had been claimed by the truth, and no distraction could pierce it. "Do you remember me?" I said, my voice steady, calm, almost gentle, but carrying the edge of a blade. The father's face drained of color. His eyes darted, searching for some clue, some escape, but found none. The fiancé opened his mouth, then closed it again, as if words had abandoned him entirely. I could see the recognition dawning in their minds, a slow, painful unraveling. Their arrogance, the casual contempt, the dismissals of the past. They had thought I was insignificant, a shadow in their world. But here I stood, a force they had ignored at their peril. "I am the one you thought you could erase." I continued, pacing slowly, deliberately close enough for them to hear every syllable, yet far enough to let the space between us magnify their terror. "The one you humiliated, the one whose life you tried to destroy for your own amusement, and now all your carefully constructed illusions are crumbling in front of you." The father's hands trembled at his sides. His jaw twitched as he struggled to form a response, but no words came. The room seemed to shrink around him, every guest acutely aware that a reckoning was unfolding. Some stared in disbelief, others in awe, and a few whispered hurriedly among themselves, trying to piece together the invisible puzzle that had suddenly revealed itself. The fiancé, once so smug and untouchable, took a half-step backward. His face, previously so confident, now betrayed fear, confusion, and the first hints of shame. "Why, you," he stammered, voice cracking. I don't understand." I raised a hand, calm, almost maternal in its gesture, but filled with undeniable authority. "You will understand soon enough. You've spent years believing you were untouchable, untouchable by consequences, untouchable by the world. But tonight, everything changes." Guests were leaning forward, silent witnesses to the unmasking of a family's arrogance. Some began to murmur among themselves, their expressions a mix of horror and fascination. The waiters, who had discreetly hidden earlier, peeked cautiously from behind columns, sensing the gravity of the moment. I walked closer to the father, stopping just a few feet from him, and let my voice soften slightly, enough to draw the room into the intimacy of confession. "Do you remember every little cruelty, every dismissal, every whispered slight against me?" I paused, letting the weight of the question settle over them like a stone. "I remember, and I have waited." The fiancé's face went pale. His bravado, once a shield, was now transparent. He looked around, desperate for an ally, but all eyes were on me. Guests who had admired him now realized that their perception had been shallow, that they had witnessed arrogance without understanding its consequences. And then, with the calm inevitability of justice, I revealed the truth, my identity, the story of betrayal, and the hidden power I had nurtured in silence. The father's knees nearly buckled, the air around him thick with disbelief. The fiancé's shoulders slumped, his smirk vanished, replaced by the raw vulnerability of someone who had been confronted by the consequences of their actions. The room had shifted completely. Laughter and music were replaced by stunned silence. Every guest now understood that the person they had underestimated, the one they had thought inconsequential, was someone who could change everything with a single presence. The carefully curated world of arrogance, entitlement, and false security had collapsed, and I was the force that had brought it down. For a moment, I simply let them feel it, the weight of recognition, the sting of betrayal, the beauty of consequences finally delivered. Then I took a slow breath, letting the room absorb the full impact of my arrival, my presence, and my revelation. This was not cruelty, this was justice. This was the unveiling of truth, long overdue, and it was sweeter than anything I could have imagined. And as the whispers grew, as the father sank into his chair with disbelief, as the fiancé finally realized the depth of his error, I knew the moment had arrived. The storm I had quietly brought into their lives had broken, and nothing would ever be the same again. The room had grown impossibly still. The weight of the revelation hung in the air like a storm cloud, dense and unyielding. Every guest sat frozen, eyes wide, whispers stifled. The father's face was pale, a man who had once commanded authority, now reduced to trembling disbelief. The fiancé, so arrogant mere hours ago, now looked small, fragile, exposed under the gaze of everyone he had once hoped to impress. I walked slowly through the crowd, letting each step leave an impression not of menace, but of inevitability. Every whisper, every glance, seemed to pause for me. I reached the table where my daughter sat, glowing in her wedding dress, blissfully unaware of the layers of tension that had been building just beneath the surface. "Dad," she asked softly, confusion and concern flickering across her face. "What's going on?" I knelt slightly beside her, offering a calm, almost tender smile. "Everything," I said simply, "everything is finally clear." Her eyes widened, and she glanced at her fiancé, who now looked like a man who had seen a ghost. The layers of arrogance, entitlement, and casual cruelty that had defined him dissolved in the face of my revelation. The whispers among the guests grew louder, but no one dared interrupt the unfolding justice. I turned my attention fully to him, the man who had once rolled his eyes at me. His smugness was gone, replaced by desperation. "Do you understand now?" I asked, my voice low, deliberate, and heavy with years of restrained fury. He opened his mouth, shut it again, stammering, his confidence unraveling. It's not what you think." But I shook my head. "No," I interrupted softly, but with the unyielding force of someone who had lived through betrayal and come out stronger. "You always think life is easy, that consequences are something other people face, not you. But tonight, you see what it feels like to be powerless." The father's shoulders slumped, his eyes darting to other guests as if seeking salvation, but it was too late. The facade had crumbled. The whispers of the staff, the stares of the guests, even the timid movement of the musicians, all confirmed the truth I had delivered. They had underestimated me, and that mistake had cost them everything. I allowed myself a quiet, measured smile. Revenge had never been about cruelty. It had been about justice, long delayed but perfectly timed. Each glance around the room told me what I needed to know. They understood the depth of the reckoning. The arrogance of a lifetime had been replaced by a humbling silence. Turning back to my daughter, I reached for her hand, and she grasped it tightly, a lifeline of love amid the chaos. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered. She didn't need to understand the full extent yet. She felt the weight of it, the change in the air, and that was enough for now. The fiancé's attempts to regain composure faltered. He tried to speak again, but his words lacked authority, drowned in the sea of astonished faces. I could see him beginning to comprehend the magnitude of what had just happened. The world he had believed was entirely his own was now out of his control. I took one last deliberate walk around the room, eyes meeting those of the guests. Some were shocked, some curious, and some clearly in awe. They saw not only my victory, but the power of patience, of silence, and of dignity preserved until the right moment. This was the lesson I had come to deliver. Respect, once lost, could always be reclaimed, but timing was everything. Finally, I returned to my seat, next to my daughter, and allowed the room to absorb the full impact of the night. The fiancé's father slumped back, pale and silent, the weight of his own misjudgments pressing down upon him. The fiancé sat stiffly, defeated but alive, a lesson carved into him for a lifetime, and as I looked around the room, I felt the bittersweet satisfaction of justice fulfilled. This was not the moment of cruelty, but of reckoning. The world, for once, had realigned, and those who had once caused pain had finally tasted the consequences of their actions. I raised my glass slowly, almost ceremoniously, though no one joined me. This was my toast to justice, to resilience, to the quiet power of someone who had endured and emerged victorious. "Here's to truth," I whispered softly, only my daughter hearing, "and to never underestimating anyone who has been wronged." The music began again, tentative at first, like a hesitant sunrise after a storm. Guests murmured and adjusted, some still shaken, others admiring, all aware that nothing would ever be quite the same. The wedding continued, but the room had shifted irreversibly. I had arrived as a shadow, a forgotten figure, but I would leave as the reckoning they would never forget. And as I looked at my daughter, radiant and unaware of all the battles she had just inherited secondhand, I knew one truth above all. Justice, when patient and precise, was sweeter than any moment of pride and far more lasting than any fleeting victory. I sat back, calm, victorious, and let the echoes of the past wash over me. The world was righted, and I, finally, was free.